Hey guys, this is Mel, and I'm so sorry for the delay, but if you're watching this, then we're going to talk about the Winchesters, the last 4 episodes of Season 1, which were Episode 110, titled Suspicious Minds, which premiered February 7th, Episode 111, which was titled You've Got a Friend, which premiered on February 21st, Episode 12, which was The Tears of a Clown, which premiered February 28th, and then finally Episode 113, which was titled Hey, That's No Way to Say Goodbye, which premiered March 7th, 2023, all on the CW. I'm recording this on April 26th, 2023. I finished watching episodes 11, 12, and 13 on April 23rd, so on Sunday, and I think I watched the 10th episode, maybe February 14th. It was between the hiatus between 10 and 11. Then life got in the way, and I couldn't find the time to actually sit down, watch the episodes, and actually take notes until just this week. So just wanted to give that heads up. I will try to do this in 40 minutes. I haven't started the timer yet, but huge spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the 4 episodes already, please go do so first and then come back and see what I have to say about the 4 episodes. Other reminders are up on screen to help you remind yourselves of those. I'm going to go in order by talking about each of the episodes first, in order, and then once I'm done covering the basics, then we'll go into each section, like what was my most shocking, my favorites, my peeves, and then those final questions at the very end, and just my overall thoughts about this season. Afterwards, I will give a heads up though that I'll mention when we actually talk about the episode. So now I'm actually going to start my 40-minute timer. The main thing I will say though is I'll try not to go into too many specifics when it comes to the storylines. Highly suggest you go watch the episode specifically for that. I just really want to just give everyone a reminder of what happened in the episode essentially before we go into like the nitty gritty of what I thought about it. So episode 10. Turns out for the timeline, I didn't mark down how long between episode 9 and episode 10, but apparently for Roxy, who we see like human Roxy, she has been a vessel for the Akrita for, quote, months. But I guess we never get a date as to when she actually got taken in their possession. But the first scene in the episode takes place in Lawrence, Kansas of 1957. We see an Akrita vessel in the form of a woman possessing a woman and trying to be the damsel in distress, and that's when someone tries to help her, I believe, if I remember correctly, she then kind of attacks that person. So with that, the storylines, I did pick up on 3 different storylines in this episode. Based on my notes, it says that the 2 hunter storylines were kept separate from each other in this one, as opposed to we've normally seen it where we'll see 2 storylines and then they somehow are connected by the end of it, or they do affect one another at some point. But in this episode, that wasn't the case. So the first one ended up being called Friend or Foe. The second one is Nightmare Memories, and the third one is Looking for Dean. Of course, they don't know his name is Dean, but we know it's Dean Winchester that they're looking for. But anyways, for the first storyline, this is where we see after Millie installed the security system for the clubhouse at the Campbell house, we see John and Mary finding Porter J. Hobbs, who is really Jack Wilcox, who was kicked out of the Men of Letters after Henry Winchester exposed him for his experiments on humans. And then Jack wanted back in the clubhouse because he did his own research and he wanted to use the Akrita stingers to transport his wife's consciousness into Mary's body, who would then be stuck in her own body like she was possessed while his wife took control. And then he wanted to use John's body to do the same thing for himself. This led to John and Mary fighting off a golem before the golem ended up killing Jack and his comatose wife. Now, the second storyline for Nightmare Memories, we see Carlos and Latika finding Roxy in the hopes that she has memories about being in the Akrita vessel and helping them locate the Queen's location, which they did end up finding being in an abandoned warehouse that was a front for the Queen's underground hideout that they keep alluding to. And then the third storyline, we see that the Akrita vessels, the Akrita that were possessing humans, they have orders to locate Dean, as their intel on him being the one that brought Mary's team together is posing more of a threat than they thought. And then the last scene of the episode shows John being confronted by Kyle, who's possessed by the Akrita, at his mom's garage. Akrita Kyle planted fake evidence that would implicate John in Kyle's murder, and then Millie and the cops show up as they hover over John, who is covered in Kyle's blood and his dead body. So there is that death tally. I noted that the Akrita that was possessing the cop was killed, or I guess the cop was killed. The Akrita just returned to its own body. We have Jack Wilcox and his comatose wife dying by the golem. Technically, the golem dies, but was he really? He was a creature created by a spell. And then, of course, Kyle, the human, died by the Akrita, killing him. Based off the tidbits, we didn't see Ada Moreau at all in this episode. We do have talks about Carlos initially wanting to break up with Anton since things were going really well, and then him becoming distracted by the end of the episode, and Carlos ends up deciding that he wants to stay with Anton. We find out that Latika has been getting dream walk visits from Tony, which is Ada's son, the half jinn, half human, who has been teaching Latika about some of the things he's learned as a jinn, including how to help someone recall forgotten memories and how to erase them, which is what they use to help Roxy with her Akrita memories. We also find out Roxy was AWOL for months, which resulted in her losing her job, her girlfriend, and her apartment. Originally, Roxy wanted to get rid of the Akrita memories, but then she decided that she wants to keep them and be a part of the final fight against the Akrita Queen, which I guess we'll talk about later. We see that Mary was accepted into Kansas State University, and we see that Millie is still trying to figure out how to fix the monster box, or the ostium, I think it's called. So there's that. The supernatural parallels I picked up on was the Akrita's reaction to possessing humans and critiquing their food reminded me a lot about when the Leviathans took on the form of Sam and Dean and trying to blend into humans. They always really badmouth what humans had to eat for food. We have Roxy's drawing tattoos are similar to the Jinn, the tattoos that Latika had drawn on Roxy's body to initiate the spell were very similar to the tattoos that Jinn have on their body when they tap into their abilities, probably due to the fact that Tony taught the spell to Latika. And then as I was reading this, I did think of another one. Where is it? Oh yeah, the fact that we dealt with a golem before in Supernatural. I think it was the Hitler episode in season 8. We dealt with a golem in that as well. So that's it for episode 10 for now. So let's move on to episode 11. So, and you've got a friend. This takes place right after or shortly after episode 110 because the first scene shows Mary, Carlos, and Latika cleaning up the autopsy room that the golem attack happened in. And as they're cleaning up, John interrupts and he's fully covered in Kyle's blood. So it's probably short enough between the two episodes to allow him to escape from the garage. So based on the storylines, there are two different storylines in this episode. First one being On the Run, second one being Dark Secret Detector. These ones were interconnected with each other by the end of it. So the first one, with On the Run, we see John being on the run for Kyle's murder. Him and Mary need to stay low at Samuel's cabin, but they are intercepted by Betty, who admits that she's been following Kyle since she met him at the end of episode 109. Apparently, it's been following him for a few weeks. While John was brought in for interrogation, he gets questioned about Dean from the Akrita that is currently possessing the lead cop in the investigation. Eventually, they're able to break John out, and as he escapes, Millie and Mary, or no, I'm getting ahead of myself, but while John's in interrogation, Millie and Mary work on getting Betty to believe them about the Akrita and telling her how much in danger John is. Meanwhile, with storyline 2, we get Latika remembering that Maggie had a bracelet that could detect a person's secrets, so they want to find this bracelet to help them pinpoint who is being possessed by the Akrita. Apparently only a person with a pure heart can wear this bracelet, so if anyone else who tries to, who is not pure of heart, they will be forced to share their dark secrets or be consumed by the shadows that come from the bracelet. Now, because of this, Latika is forced buy the bracelet to share her darkest secret with Carlos, which ends up being that in her past, Latika disobeyed her father to provide food to the family servant, Sonia, which led to punishment and Latika running away, but her running away led to her father ultimately killing Sonia by having her freeze to death on the coldest night. She also confirmed to Carlos that her parents aren't dead, but to her, they pretty much are after what they did. And Carlos still accepts her. After they're able to get the bracelet off of Latika after she shares her biggest secret, they then use the bracelet on Betty, who proves to be a pure of heart, and then she's able to use the bracelet to see all the Akrita presence that are possessing the human cops, and ultimately convinces her about what they were saying and to help them break John out of police custody. And yeah, so we finally have her on our side, which is great. The last scene of the episode shows John and Mary reflecting on the mission. While they're driving out of town, we see Mary telling John that Kyle's death wasn't his fault while this is happening, and it seems like their new mission is now trying to locate Dean Winchester. Again, they don't know they don't know what name he is, just as the Krita don't know who he is as well. Death Tally, when I think about it, I don't think anyone actually died in this episode. Maybe knocked out, but yeah, I might have to go back. But tidbits, we don't see Ada Monroe again. We do learn a bit more about Latika's relationship with Maggie. We find that Maggie used to share everything with Latika, who didn't feel like she could do the same thing due to her dark secret about Sonia. This is actually the first time we see Maggie's photo, and that's probably because the presence of the bracelet did take on the form of Maggie to kind of appeal to Latika before she ended up getting trapped like Carlos. So that should have been an indicator when we first saw her photo that we were going to see her actually in front of us somehow. I'm trying to think what else took on. There are a few instances on Supernatural, like as we talk into the Supernatural parallels, there are a few times where we've seen faces from the past coming back in another form. So I guess you can say mother of all, any shapeshifter creature, of course. But season 4, episode 2, like when the original Meg Masters came back, when Hendrickson came back, when I forgot his name from season 2, from the Night Shifter episode. The one with conspiracy thingy, his name's gonna be up on screen. When they came back to haunt the dead, it's kind of similar maybe to what Maggie was showing right now, but another parallel, I guess, was the season 2 Baltimore case about the corrupt cop having them then take the other cop on their side. So Dana Schultz ghost, I think it was The Usual Suspects was the episode title, needing to have it seen before them in order to realize the brothers were telling the truth. Same with Adrian Hendrickson, chasing him forever in season 2, first part of season 3, and it only was in Justin Bellows where he was confronted by demons that he actually believed the brothers. So it's kind of similar with Betty having to be confronted with seeing all the Akrita essence that she was able to believe what the hunters were saying. But let's move on to episode 12. So the Tears of a Clown. And I'm gonna admit, clown, not my thing. So I'll do my best. But I couldn't tell the timeline, maybe 1 week, maybe a few days on the run since episode 111. But we do get a time that between the teaser scene or the first scene, and when our hunters find out about the case, it's about 2 days. But in the first scene, it shows us being at a circus where Wally, the victim in question, can see Limbo's tent and the clown, while his friend can't see the clown or the tent, and then it leads to Wally having some really insane clown makeup, which kind of freaked me out. But when it comes to storylines, 3 different storylines. From the looks of it, they were 2 completely separate ones, but they do tie in later on. So the first one deals with crazy clowns, the second one another power source, and the third one is search for Dean. So with the first storylines, we get Carlos bringing up Wally's disappearance, which happened 2 days later, like I mentioned. We find out the urban legend that is Limbo the Clown, who apparently traded his soul for dark magic in order to stay happy forever, and in order to do so, he needed to spread the happiness with his enchanted mirror. Along the way, the hunters meet Clarence, who is searching for his little brother Roger, who was taken by Limbo 30 years ago. They end up using Limbo's golden ticket, which appears before Mary, and it allows her to venture into Limbo's tent. John and Latika and Carlos were able to use Clarence's old ticket from 30 years ago to gain entry into the tent and try to find Mary. Ultimately, Mary and John get trapped as clowns, and it was Carlos who got through to little brother Roger, who was a clown, and appealing to his desire to see his brother again, and that is what broke Limbo's spell on everyone, destroying him and setting everybody free. By the end of that, Mary does admit to John that she liked not having to worry about their problems for once when they were under Limbo's spell, and then it ultimately led to John apologizing for his anger with everything, and then Mary apologized from there as well. Now, with another power source, this focuses on Ada Monroe, so we do see her again, and she's trying to follow a lead to magic that can kill the Akrita Queen, and it looks like the witches she goes to see, they all know about her, and they call her an amateur. They also know about the coming war with the Akrita, and they believe it cannot be stopped. Says here that they wanted Ada, or I guess when Ada couldn't prove her magic and prove that she wasn't just an amateur to these witches, she ends up meeting Rowena McLeod from Supernatural, and she wants to strike a deal. She wants the demon that Ada trapped in a plant, and because that demon has info on her son Fergus. His name's not mentioned in the episode. We just know from Supernatural, and in return, Rowena will give her the power she needs to defeat the Akrita. Ultimately, Ada tries to use her powers and she overexhausts herself to try to stop Rowena. Rowena ends up staying until she wakes up and letting her know that by doing so, Ada proved her abilities to Rowena, and not only does she offer her a spot in her coven if she survives the Akrita War, but she does give her the power source she needed, which was a crystal that harnesses the power, enough magic to stop the Akrita, but the final ingredient is a piece of Ada's soul, and it has a one-time use. It's not clear if it's specifically Ada's soul that's needed or if it's just any piece of a human soul. So there's that. And then, of course, storyline number 3 was the continued search for Dean. We see John and Mary are still on the road at the beginning searching for Dean. And John is a bit aggressive when they are questioning people about him, and Mary confronts John, and that ties into the clown storyline afterwards. But that's kind of like in the back burner. They start off trying to find Dean, and they got detoured. The last scene of the episode, we do see Millie arriving, I guess, to the old circus field, and she informs them that she and Betty found a witness that could clear John's name, as the witness saw Kyle entering the garage after the timestamp of the phone call he gave to the police that pretty much tattled on John. Then afterwards, they all went back to the clubhouse, and Ada told them about what she found with the new power source and the details of what the Akrita's last ingredient is, and that apparently they need a 5-planet alignment in order to open the portal. And Latika uncovers that 5-planet alignment has already started. Death Tally, Limbo the Clown. Technically, Limbo's targets went missing, and then they were just set free, so they weren't killed off. But I guess for everybody in the moment when they were taken, they were presumed dead. And then tidbits. Let's see. So we did find out before Ada went to go see the witches, she was working with Samuel, and they only split off to find different leads in regards to another weapon or power source against the Akrita. We do see John having a bit more facial hair than before, a little bit of a different haircut. He's giving more Dean vibes now than the Sam vibes. We have Mary confronting John about his avoidance of the murder charges against him for Kyle, and then he flips it back on her about her delaying her decision about college, because even though she got accepted to it, she hasn't given her answer yet. And then we also see at the beginning of the episode, Latika likes carnivals while Carlos does not, and I believe that decision has changed by the end. They're not too crazy about it, both of them. And finally, episode 13, the finale. season finale, which, hey, there's no way to say goodbye, continues straight from episode 112, just because of the fact that the 5-planet alignment has already started. The first scene starts off in Detroit, Michigan in 1972. So this is when when John returns from the war, and this is when he gets his letter from Dean. We also then see Bobby Singer returning to reprimand Dean for interfering with with giving the letter to John. But of course, they say one last hunt. So that's great. So right off the bat, so I will admit, I did watch this scene on YouTube right after it aired, like I think March 7th, March 8th, just because it was so many things popping up on YouTube about the special appearances, and I couldn't help myself. So I did watch that scene already before actually watching the episode this past Sunday. So, anyways, storylines are going to be different because it's very intertwined with each other, so I'm going to cut it off into two parts. So the first part is finding Dean, then the second part is the hunters fighting with the Akrita. So with the first portion, Samuel comes back and he says that he has a lead on how to find the mystery man that is Dean Winchester. This leads to Samuel, Mary, and John meeting Joan Hopkins in a bar and them quickly realizing that she is the quote-unquote Akrita queen. She was first a hunter that was born in 1693, but then she was corrupted with monster essence, and then the Men of Letters ended up banishing her to another world, and that's where she met up and joined with the Akrita, from my understanding. Now, with all that, we also find out that Joan kind of tossed Dean through a portal between worlds, and so they think he's not a threat anymore. So, with the second part of the storyline, we find Latika being possessed by the Akrita, which then forces Ada to use the soul crystal for her one-time use to save Latika from being possessed. Then Carlos gets the idea, or maybe the order's wrong, but Carlos gets the idea to reverse the polarity of the ostium box and using Dean's journal to pull Dean to them instead of forcing the Akrita away to their world. But they can only do this at midnight. So this leads to John, Samuel, and Carlos providing a distraction in fighting off Joan and her minions who was trying to open up the portal to the Akrita world, while Mary, Latika, Ada, and Millie deal with the ostium box and try to get Dean out of the portal. Ultimately, they only bring back the Impala. Not sure why Dean wasn't pulled with the Impala, but only the Impala came back. And that's when Mary got the idea that since the Impala is from another world, they can use the Impala to kill Joan. So she ends up driving and she ends up running over Joan, but before she does so, Joan opens the Akrita portal and Mary ends up driving through it as she runs Joan over and she pretty much disappears in the portal. Only for the Impala to drive back out with Dean in the driver's seat and Mary in the passenger seat. This is where we get Dean explaining to everybody his involvement and how he's already dead. He was driving around in heaven. He got word. He was traveling through the multiverse. He got word about the Akrita, and he wanted to stop the Akrita before they invaded and got to the world where Sam is currently living his life. Ultimately, he gave his own journal and the cult to John and Mary after getting the cult from Jack, who came back to bring him and Bobby back to their world. So there's that. I should also mention that Latika was originally possessed because Joan needed to get into the Men of Letters bunker to remove the sigils they had placed on the portal to the Akrita world. Forgot to mention that. So the last scene of the episode shows John and Mary driving off together, I guess finding their normal life together in some way or seeing where it leads them as they find themselves together. Then we see the montage of all the different dynamics we saw during the series, not just with John and Mary, but all the friendships they have with their hunters friends, and it gave very series finale vibes. I know we don't know yet about the fate of whether we're going to get a season 2 or not, but I think the way that they ended it, it could go either way. So we'll talk about that later. Death tally, Joan Hopkins, the leader of the Akrita Queen. I'm not sure if the Akrita minions were also killed by the death of their queen or if they just scurried off. Not quite sure. We'll talk about that later. But tidbits, though, we do see the start of the episode when Samuel returned. He did find Mary's acceptance letter to Kansas University, and at the beginning, he didn't seem like he wanted her to stay in Kansas if she was going to leave hunting and like start a new normal life. But I don't think we get a resolution at the end if like she does pick that or if he's accepting of her going there. I'm not sure. I can't remember. And then by the end of the episode, we do see Latika finding a way to regrow the missing piece of Ada's soul that she used to power the crystal. I'm not sure how, but we'll talk about that later. And then supernatural parallels that I picked up on this one, I guess. Oh, I forgot to mention that for the clown episode. So, first off, supernatural parallels that I picked up for the clown episode was the Hall of Mirrors. It was very reminiscent of the room of mirrors that you dealt with the Bloody Mary episode. Also, the theory that if you smash the mirror with the creature inside of it was supposed to destroy the creature. That's what happened with Bloody Mary. That was kind of the impression I got with Limbo the Clown, but that's not what we got. But the supernatural parallels for 113 was the use of human souls. We do find out from there that they're a huge power source, first introduced in season 6. Dean's Impala music rule of driver pick the music, shotgun shit is Keiko. We do see Dean using a different alias. He tells them that his name is James Hetfield, as opposed to using Dean Van Halen, which is the alias he used when he first travels to 1973 in episode 403 of Supernatural, when he first meets John and Mary. There's that. And then Dick Roman's connection to the Leviathan minions is something similar to possibly what Joan Hopkins had with the Accreted minions. Not quite sure, but it definitely gave me those vibes, especially with the whole their ability to possess people. You pretty much couldn't tell who was wearing the proper skins and everything. So season 7 definitely gave me that vibes when it came to the Accreta takeover, if you will. So now that we've talked about all the episodes separately, let's go into the individual. So, most shocking moment of the episodes. For episode 110, the shocker was that Kyle's confrontation was at the very end of the episode, when the promo made you think that it was more of the focus for the episode. For 111, the shocker was, for me, I thought it was the real reason why Latika ran away from home. The way she was setting it up, I thought she was going to say that she had killed her own father to protect Sonia, but then to find out that no, that wasn't the path was kind of surprising, but I guess it still follows in line with Latika's character of what actually happened. Most shocking for the clown episode was, I guess, the fact that there was no smashing mirrors when they mentioned that there was an enchanted mirror involved in Limbo's urban legend. And then the third shocking moment was that the Accreta Queen was a hunter before. She wasn't actually originally the creature. And that they ended up killing the Accreta Queen by running her over with the Impala. And of course, all the supernatural special appearances, but like, I knew that before the episode because I saw those clips on YouTube right after the episode aired, and it wasn't a surprise when I actually watched the full episode, you know? So that's on me. But let's talk about top favorite moments for each episode now. So for episode 110, a favorite I had was Latika and Carlos, specifically their car ride back when they were talking about relationships and they're just reflecting. And then Carlos ended up opening up about Anton. And then another favorite was just John and Mary, her acceptance letter, both of them being suspicious together about what's his name again? About Jack Wilcox, and them just being on the same page together was my favorite. For episode 111, favorite was Carlos and Latika, them doing a hunt together, but also just the emotional drawback of what was being shared, the dark secret, and then the support that was shown from it afterwards. The unwavering support between them. I love their dynamic. Another favorite was just Mary and Betty, first seeing them as enemies and then coming together as partners to help John. I really appreciate that. And then, of course, John standing up during his interrogation with that Accreta cop was great. I love that he didn't just immediately cave. I love that he was able to still be smart about what he was saying and take notice of what they were or weren't saying to him. So that was great. For episode 112, obviously Rowena coming back, also having purple magic. was fantastic, and I loved that she was back, and I love that she got to play a part in providing that power source for Ada. And then another favorite I did have was just all the different mix-ups we got with the dynamics. The fact that we got Mary and Carlos working together, we have John and Latika working together, both in the fight for hunting, but then also having a moment to just reflect on each other's, I guess, personal headspace, if you will. And then finally, episode 113. Biggest favorite was just the return of Dean Winchester, Bobby Singer, and Jack the New God. It was just great seeing them all in the small bit of time that we had, but just having the characterizations, the mannerisms, and it's just like, oh, I miss these three. And we've never had the three of them together, right? So it's like it's always been alternate world Bobby with Jack and then Dean. This is the first time we get to see our original Bobby back with Jack and Dean together. So it was just really great to see that dynamic as well too. And then kind of them playing off of each other. So let's get into the peeves of the episode. So I don't have any for episode 110 that I took note of. For episode 111, the peeve I did have was that the creature's appearance as Maggie, it seemed very short to me, yet they put so much weight and such a build-up on the closeness between Latika with Maggie. I thought that we would see Maggie's face a little bit longer to kind of draw on that emotional connection with Latika, and when we didn't, I thought that was a lost moment. And then another one was just the lost opportunity, the Betty not trying to see John a second time while he's in that interrogation room. I thought she might have been like when the Akrita were talking some deep stuff. I thought she would have been behind that viewing mirror. I thought she would have been eavesdropping and kind of gain her own suspicions, since especially after talking with Mary, and then maybe that's when she'd think, okay, maybe I have to think something up. But that didn't happen, so I'm a little disappointed there for that lost opportunity. And then with episode 12, I definitely didn't like that Mary just stormed into Limbo's tent without any backup. That was not the smartest move at all. And so that just didn't make sense to me. And then, of course, escaping. I don't know if this is a P because it just didn't match up with my theory of it or not, or maybe it's just completely it didn't make sense afterwards, and I had to really think about it. But it was the idea of escaping Limbo wasn't a mirror smash like I thought it was building up towards, but it was just from one of its victims actually being sad and not being stuck with the happiness that his corrupted spell was doing on them. I had a feeling that it was going to be like they're going to have to tap into like Roger and trying to snap him out of it, but I thought it would have to be Roger that would have to have smashed the enchanted mirror. It wasn't just Roger thinking, oh, I miss my brother. I didn't think that would be all it took to destroy Limbo, you know? I thought you had to get someone from the clown troupe on your side, and then they would have to be the one that smashed the mirror. But that's not the case. And lastly, the peeves I had for episode 113. The Joan Hopkins history about her being a hunter and then corrupted by monster essence and then her somehow becoming the Akrita queen. It felt very rushed. It was all revealed in this last episode. There was no like trailing of like us finding bits and pieces in the previous episode. It just felt very like here. Like here you go. Here's all of it. That's all you need to know. So I thought it was very fast and it felt very rushed because of it. Another peeve I had was that the Impala ended up being the weapon used against the Queen. I mean, it's fitting because as a Supernatural fan, you'd hope that the Impala would, we know it plays a bigger part in that lore, and just seeing her being used as a viable weapon is a great change. But in the perspective of like being these characters in this world, it's like you really had to have the chance of finding this car from another world to be able to destroy the Akrita Queen, and then like to just run her over. I mean, she's supposed to have all the strengths of all the monster essence that she absorbed, and I'm pretty sure just running a monster over wouldn't have been enough to kill her, you know? Um, or definitely like blow her up into pieces, right? It might just like push, like, you know. And then the last peeve I did have, and I'll probably explain it more, is Dean's explanation about his presence felt very rushed. It is the explanation we needed to confirm that this was taking place in an alternate universe. But I will say that if I wasn't a fan of Supernatural, and if I didn't have all those 15 seasons to cover it, if I didn't have that to help fill in the spaces of what he was saying, if I only just watched the Winchesters, it would have been a lot of information and very confusing to keep things in line. And I feel like if they were going to drop that big of a bomb from Dean, I feel like it should have been something that was spaced out a much episodes. You would have had bits and pieces of what Dean was saying be discovered by John and Mary and the hunters in their own way of research. So then by the time they actually met Dean, they already had their own theory of what was happening, and it's just Dean confirming or filling in the spaces they weren't able to find instead of him just giving him the whole cheat sheet, you know? So I don't know if that is because of the shorter episode order or what, but it definitely, while it was great seeing Dean giving that speech, if I only watched the Winchesters, it would have been a lot of exposition and a lot of info dumping that I would have no context of. Like, I really felt like John married all the Winchester characters in that moment of like, I don't know what the hell is being talked about, you know? So that's the only upside there, or only downside there. Love seeing Dean again in a bigger capacity, but it just seemed like very rushed return for him. And of course, you'd want him to say, or at least hint a little bit more to these characters what his connection is to them, but of course, he's not going to, so there's that. I will admit, though, I did go to fanfiction right after watching this episode to see if someone wrote an afterwards of them reading Dean's journal and trying to put the pieces together. So there's that. But let's move on to random questions before we fully talk about things. So for episode 110, I did have the question of, would Jack's Wilcox transference plan work on Mary if she already had the anti-possession tattoo against the Akrita? While it's not another Akrita consciousness that's invading her, I would assume that the stingers needed to achieve it would be blocked because it's still Akrita blood. That was the question I had. And after that episode, did I think this was in the supernatural timeline, or was it an alternate universe? I thought it was the alternate universe option because of the fact that apparently the Men of Letters were wiped out by the Akrita, not by Abaddon, which is what happened on Supernatural. And also that happened a year earlier, or no, a year later than what this Akrita invasion did. Episode 11 had the following questions. If Betty was following John for weeks since the end of episode 109, didn't she see him on a hunt? And then didn't she pick up on that? Second question was, if Latika ran away from home, how did she find out about Sonia's death? And then after this episode, I still thought this was an alternate world, just because that they confirmed that the Akrita Queen feared Dean because he is, quote, not of this world. So, kind of confirmed there that he's alternate universe Dean, which is our normal supernatural Dean. Alright, episode 12. Questions I had were, in the moment I thought it was something to think about, how Limbo targeted Mary instead of John when it was building up that John had the emotions that Limbo was targeting, but I guess the fight that Mary had with John was enough to stir up the emotions that Limbo needed to find his victim. Alright, sorry guys, I had to relocate. So, based off of that, after this episode, did I still think this was alternate universe, aside from it being confirmed? Yes, just because of Rowena's introduction to this universe, because she had purple magic when before on Supernatural, she had to take a lot of steps to gain that level of magic, and I think that was from the Book of the Damned, if I remember correctly. And then, yeah, was when she got that. So she ended up getting, I think that was season 10 or 11, she ended up getting that level of magic, and then which was in the 2010s, and yet she already has it by the time it's 1970 on this world. So that's a huge indicator there. And then finally, the questions I had for the season finale. First one, why were they fighting the Akrita with swords? And if they needed to use swords, where were their shields? I mean, did they explain, is it because it was silver swords and it's better than having silver daggers? So that's something. Another question was Joan banished for 15 years? Because they said that the last Akrita invasion was in 1957 when they destroyed the Men of Letters. But if Joan was banished in 1957, then what was she doing from 1693 when she was born to 1957? Of course, maybe she's like in her 30s, so like early 1700s. She must have got corrupted and used monster essence. But then, what was she doing for the rest of that time? I would have thought the Akritas locked her away for like, or not. Yeah, I would have thought the Men of Letters locked her away longer than just 15 years ago, and only now she's coming back for revenge. You know. Um, so that's one there. Another question was, when Joan was killed by the Impala smashing into her, were the Akrita that were possessing the humans in that fight, were they also killed, and it was the humans being back in control that ran off from the scene, or did were the Akrita still possessing the humans, and that's why they fled from the scene to get to a safe place? I'm not sure quite of the connectivity between Joan as the Akrita Queen to the rest of the Akrita. So there's that. And then another question was, if they brought the Colt, why not use it against the Akrita? Granted, Jack brought the Colt after they killed the Akrita Queen, but I'm just wondering, if the Colt was an option, why was that not brought in sooner? And then, I remembered another observation. Or I guess this is kind of a question too, but if you're trying to get anti-possession tattoos, why would you put it in a place that's easy to access? We saw it here with Latika. She had it like just under her collarbone, and then Joan had no problem burning it off and then allowing the Akrita to possess her. So I'm wondering, why would you not put that tattoo somewhere that's not easily accessible? Like, why not put it where you're on your blood, or where your underwear covers it, or if you're going to wear a whole bunch of layers, put it somewhere where you have to take off a bunch of those layers to get to the tattoo. Or if anything, why not put it on the bottom of your foot? That way you'd have to take your shoe off to get to the anti-possession tattoo, you know? Because of that. Because we've seen other times too where we've had the anti-possession demon tattoo get burned off or get locked in, and then they were stuck. Like we saw that with Sam in season 2. Meg ended up locking herself in Sam's body so that they couldn't exorcise her out. So, and that's because the tattoo. Wait, he didn't have the tattoo at that time, but it was another mark that they used, right? Same theory. But then of course, question of, do you think this is a supernatural timeline or an alternate timeline? So this is where it was confirmed by Dean that the Winchesters that we've been following is on a different world, but it's still in the same timeline. So it looks like Dean didn't travel back in time. So it might just be this world is just starting a lot later. Because for Dean, on the supernatural timeline, he still is dead. He's already died. It's still in 2020 over there. And then I guess times moves differently, so he found another world that just seemed to be further back in the timeline. So he didn't technically time travel. He was just jumping into where that current world was situated in the timeline. Which was very interesting. I thought it was going to be a time travel situation on top of being an alternate world situation, but it ended up not being that much of a complexity. So that's always great there. But it did leave a lot of questions about whether or not he would just go back and just have some peace or if he would stay around, because he did end up giving the Colt to John and Mary and the warning of using it against the yellow-eyed demon. So that is still a threat. Would we see? I'm wondering if we do get a season 2, would that be the next thing that happens? I'm not quite sure. Would this really be the end? I guess that's the biggest question of all. What would you see season 2 as? It's a little bit harder to picture because of the fact that I'm also kind of pairing it to season 1 of Supernatural, because season 1 of Supernatural ended with pretty much on the cliffhanger with the car accident. But the big bad that we've been fighting was not dead. He was still very much a threat, and that was the focus of season 2. And then ultimately finding out what happened to John in the whole demon deal that he made. That was the big thing, and then unraveling why Sam was targeted was the focus of season 2. And that was still seeded throughout season 1 of Supernatural. So I'm just kind of thinking, now that they've already dealt with the Credo, which is supposed to be this big major thing. I mean, we did find out that they were Chuck's final creations that would wipe out all of humanity if he failed to do so. And yet you're dealing with that in season 1 of a new show. So it's like, what could top that for season 2? What could you cover? Because you also ended the show with a nice clean way where you could pretty much left it open-ended. But there was no cliffhanger of what's coming next. So I really don't know where it would go. So that's why I'm a little worried about whether there's a season 2, because I don't know if it's because of the new direction that the CW is going in or what have you, but I guess we'll find out mid-May, because that's when the upfronts are going to happen. We'll find out if we do get a new season. It did end off in a good place where I'm okay if it doesn't get a new season, but I'd be curious to know where they would go with this afterwards, and it would be interesting to see who from Supernatural they would bring back again, or how would they tie off, or maybe would they actually allow us to see John and Mary dive into Dean's journal and learning more about where this mystery man came from. Would we actually get to see that? But otherwise, that's pretty much my thoughts. I know it was a mix of emotions. I feel like I'd probably feel better about it if they had more episodes, just so that they could space things out when it came to the bigger story plots, when it came to the Accredo Queen, with Joan, with Dean's involvement and everything. But I know they were only given 13 episodes, and they weren't told originally that it was just going to be 13, because I know that they were hoping to get the back end of episodes ordered, and then they weren't. So that can also change up how you structure a full season as well. But I did enjoy what they were able to create. I really like who they cast, the dynamics. It definitely gave you a more group vibe, whereas Supernatural, the early seasons, was all about Sam and Dean. This one, you got to see the different relationship with not just John and Mary, but you got to see the friendships between John and Carlos, John and Latika, and then Mary's own with Latika, and then Mary with Carlos, and then the bonding, and then the friendship with Carlos and Latika. It was just all the different sides of that quartet was great to see, and I like that we got to see bits and pieces of it. It wasn't just solely just John and Mary, or it wasn't just solely Carlos and Latika's friendship. So I did enjoy that. It was also great to see Millie's involvement in everything, and just not being kept in the dark when it came to John's new interest. But it was very interesting to see her support on that, and it was great to see just what the difference would have been, because we don't know much about John's mom in the Supernatural timeline. So it's great to see a different version of where he did have that support. And then, of course, it was very interesting to see Mary's relationship with her father, because we do know a version of that from Supernatural, and it was just great to see a different way of how that came about in the world of the Winchesters. So I'm definitely glad about what we got. Really don't know about what's in store for this, but I will tune in if there is a season 2. I probably won't do any recaps. I'm still deciding at this point, but with life getting crazy, it's a little harder to find my own patience to just sit down and actually take notes. I think I prefer just watching things on the go now because they're just more convenient. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you guys for tuning in because that's about it for my thoughts. I am over my 40 minutes, but not by much, and I do blame the fact that I had to relocate. But thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for your patience. I am interested to see what you have to say about the final 4 episodes of this season in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you thought, what you had theorized, and all that's in between. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out my other videos. When I look back on how long it's been since I've had this channel and just how many shows I had covered, and at this point, a lot of them are over by this point. It's quite a recap for sure, quite a reflection. But thank you so much for tuning in to that journey with me. I'm not sure what's going to be in store next for the channel, but I definitely will be doing a video about the upfront, so hopefully I have a better idea when that video comes out of what I have in store. But until then, guys, this is Mel. Wish you all a great day, great week wherever you are. Please stay safe and have a good rest of your day. Bye.